The morning was grey, but the real weight fell when he saw his blind son being protected by a stranger. The girl, barefoot and dirty, faced the stepmother with silent courage, and the father, paralyzed, understood that love can come from where you least expect it. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Return. The morning fog hung low over the sprawling estates of Greenwich, Connecticut, cloaking the luxurious homes in a mystic veil. Robert Mitchell, one of the most successful real estate developers on the East Coast, gripped the steering wheel of his Bentley as he navigated the familiar roads toward home. He hadn't planned to return from his business trip to London until tomorrow, but an unexplainable feeling had compelled him to catch an earlier flight. After 3 weeks away, the thought of surprising his wife Sarah and his 8-year-old son Oliver had seemed like a perfect idea. The stately gates of the Mitchell estate parted silently as Rob punched in the security code. His chest tightened with anticipation. He had missed Oliver desperately during this trip. The boy's blindness, a result of complications at birth, had always made Rob especially protective of his son. Since losing his first wife Julie to illness 4 years ago, Oliver had become Rob's entire world, even if his demanding career often kept him away more than he liked to admit. As the Bentley rolled up the curved driveway, Rob's thoughts drifted to Sarah, his wife of 2 years. The marriage had been somewhat rushed, perhaps too rushed looking back, but she had seemed perfect, beautiful, charming, and initially so attentive to Oliver. Rob had convinced himself that Oliver needed a mother figure, and that he needed someone to help manage their enormous home, while he focused on expanding Mitchell properties across the country. The mansion came into view, its Georgian columns and meticulously landscaped grounds a testament to Rob's success. Something caught his eye in the side garden, movement near the oak tree where Oliver liked to sit. Rob slowed the car, not wanting to announce his arrival yet. That's when he saw them, 3 figures beneath the sprawling oak. Even from this distance he could make out Oliver's small frame, his son's body trembling visibly. Beside him stood a girl Rob had never seen before, thin with tangled brown hair, wearing what appeared to be a threadbare dress despite the autumn chill. And there was Sarah, her posture rigid with fury, arm raised as if ready to strike. "What the hell?" Rob muttered, killing the engine immediately. The scene before him made no sense, yet triggered something primal in him. The girl had positioned herself partially in front of Oliver, like a shield, while his son clutched at her arm, his face a mask of fear. Rob was out of the car in seconds, moving across the lawn with long, purposeful strides. As he drew closer, Sarah's voice carried across the garden. "I told you never to leave the house without permission." She hissed at Oliver, "And you," turning to the girl, "get your filthy hands off him. Do you know who we are? This isn't some playground for street trash." "Please, Mrs. Mitchell." The girl's voice was soft but unwavering. "He just wanted to play outside. He wasn't doing anything wrong. How dare you tell me about my own stepson? You little—" "Sarah!" Rob's voice thundered across the garden. All 3 figures froze. "What's going on here?" Sarah spun around, her perfectly made-up face transforming instantly from rage to surprise, then to a practiced smile. "Robert, oh my God, you're home early. What a wonderful surprise." She moved toward him, arms outstretched for an embrace that Rob sidestepped. His eyes were fixed on Oliver, who had turned his head at the sound of his father's voice. "Dad?" Oliver's voice quavered. "Dad, is that really you?" Rob was by his son's side in an instant, kneeling in the grass regardless of his expensive suit. "Yes, buddy, I'm here. I came home early to surprise you." He placed gentle hands on Oliver's shoulders, feeling the boy's trembling begin to subside. "Are you okay?" The girl beside Oliver hadn't moved, her wide blue eyes wary as they darted between Rob and Sarah. Up close, Rob could see that her clothes weren't just cheap. They were worn through in places, and her shoes were falling apart. Despite this, there was a dignified set to her jaw that struck him immediately. "Oliver, what's happening here?" Rob asked, keeping his voice calm for his son's sake, though inside he was seething. Before Oliver could answer, Sarah interjected smoothly. "Nothing to worry about, darling. I just caught Oliver wandering outside without supervision, which he knows is dangerous given his condition. And this, Girl was trespassing on our property. I was simply addressing the situation. The girl flinched at Sarah's words but didn't contradict her. Rob noticed how Oliver's hand still gripped the girl's arm like a lifeline. That's not true, Oliver said suddenly, his voice small but clear. Emma wasn't trespassing. I asked her to stay. Rob looked at the girl, Emma, with renewed interest. Is that your name, Emma? She nodded, eyes downcast. Emma Carter, sir. Emma found me when I was sitting by the gate, Oliver continued, gaining confidence. I was just listening to the birds, Dad. I wasn't far from the house. Emma asked if I was okay because I was alone. We started talking and she told me stories. She's my friend. The simplicity of Oliver's explanation broke something in Rob's heart. When was the last time he'd heard his son speak with such animation about anyone? She's not his friend. She's clearly after something, Sarah hissed, her composure slipping. Look at her, Robert. Girls like her don't just wander into neighborhoods like ours without an agenda. Emma's cheeks flushed, but she lifted her chin. I wasn't trying to take anything, ma'am. I come to this neighborhood sometimes to... Well, the gardens are pretty. I can tell by how they smell different from where I live. When I saw Oliver, he looked lonely. That's all. Where do you live, Emma? Rob asked gently. Willow Creek, sir. With my Aunt Martha. It's not far if you walk along the river path. Rob knew Willow Creek, a working-class neighborhood that bordered the more affluent sections of Greenwich. Not impoverished, but certainly a world away from the luxury of their own estate. Sarah made a dismissive sound. See? She's from that development on the other side of the river. Robert, we need to call security. This is exactly why we have gates. Something in Sarah's tone, the sheer contempt, made Rob study his wife more carefully. In that moment, seeing her perfectly manicured hand still clutching Oliver's arm too tightly, her eyes cold despite her practiced smile, Rob felt as though he were truly seeing her for the first time. Sarah, he said quietly, don't take your hand off my son. A tense silence followed. Sarah's smile faltered, then hardened into something else entirely. You can't possibly be taking their side. This girl was trespassing, and Oliver disobeyed my explicit instructions to... I said, Rob repeated, standing to his full height, take your hand off my son. Something in his tone must have registered, because Sarah released Oliver immediately, taking a step back. You're overreacting, Robert. I was protecting him. That's what you asked me to do when you left for London, remember? To keep him safe. Oliver moved closer to Emma, who instinctively placed a protective arm around his shoulders. The gesture wasn't lost on Rob. This child, this stranger, was providing more comfort to his son than the woman he had married to be Oliver's stepmother. Oliver, Rob said gently, why don't you and Emma go sit on the patio? Nancy should be in the kitchen. Ask her to make you both some hot chocolate. Really, Dad? Can Emma stay? The hope in Oliver's voice was unmistakable. Yes, for now. We'll sort everything out. Go on. As the children moved toward the house, Rob noticed how naturally Emma guided Oliver, describing obstacles in their path with simple, respectful directions rather than pulling him along as he'd seen many adults do. She walked slightly ahead, occasionally touching his hand to signal a turn or step, speaking in quiet tones that seemed to put his son at ease. When they were out of earshot, Sarah rounded on Rob. I cannot believe you're undermining me like this. That girl is nothing but trouble, and you're inviting her into our home. What will people think? I don't give a damn what people think, Rob replied, his voice dangerously quiet. What I care about is what I just saw. My son, terrified. A strange girl protecting him from you. Explain that, Sarah. Now. Sarah's perfectly composed facade began to crack. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. Oliver needs discipline, structure. You're gone for weeks at a time, and I'm left dealing with everything. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to manage this house, your social obligations, and a blind child who constantly needs attention? The way she said blind child, as though Oliver were a burden, a project rather than a person, made Rob's blood run cold. How long has this been going on? The discipline? He asked, the word bitter on his tongue. Sarah waved a dismissive hand. Don't be dramatic, Robert. I've never hurt him, if that's what you're implying. But someone needs to establish boundaries. He can't just wander around outside alone. What if something happened to him? He wasn't alone, Rob pointed out. He was with Emma. Oh, please. A grubby little girl from the wrong side of town? That's hardly appropriate supervision. Rob studied his wife, seeing beneath her perfect exterior to something he should have recognized long ago. The calculation in her eyes, the careful way she was backpedaling, reframing the narrative. How many times had he seen that same technique in business? Negotiations? Sarah wasn't concerned about Oliver. She was concerned about maintaining her position, her status, her control. How does Oliver usually spend his days when I'm away? Rob asked suddenly. The question seemed to catch Sarah off guard. What do you mean? It's a simple question. What does my son do all day? Who does he spend time with? What makes him happy? Do you even know? Sarah's expression hardened. He has his tutors, his music lessons. Nancy makes sure he eats properly, and Mrs. Winters comes to clean. What more do you want from me, Robert? I'm your wife, not the help. In that moment, with the morning fog finally lifting from the grand estate, Rob felt a different kind of clarity dawning. The perfect life he thought he'd rebuilt after Julie's passing was nothing but an elaborate facade. Beautiful, expensive, and completely hollow. We need to talk, he said finally, turning toward the house where, through the French doors, he could see Oliver and Emma sitting at the kitchen counter, steam rising from mugs between them. His son was smiling, actually smiling, as Emma apparently described something with animated gestures. But not now. Right now I need to get to know the girl who seems to be a better friend to my son than either of us has been. Without waiting for Sarah's response, Rob walked away, leaving her standing alone beneath the oak tree where, for the first time since returning home, he had seen the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. Chapter 2. The Path to Prosperity. Rob Mitchell hadn't always been wealthy. Born in a modest suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, to hard-working middle-class parents, he had learned early on that nothing in life came without effort. His father, a high school math teacher, and his mother, a nurse, had instilled in him both a strong work ethic and an unwavering moral compass. Those values had served as his foundation as he'd climbed from a scholarship student at Cornell University to founding Mitchell Properties, now one of the most respected real estate development firms in the country. As Rob sank into the leather chair in his home office, his mind drifted back through the chapters of his life that had led him to this moment of crisis. The antique clock on his mahogany desk showed it was approaching midnight. The house was finally quiet. Oliver was asleep in his room, with Nancy, their housekeeper of 10 years, checking on him periodically. Sarah had retreated to the guest suite after their tense conversation earlier, a conversation that had ended with Rob suggesting, in no uncertain terms, that they needed space to think about their future. And Emma, the girl had reluctantly gone home to her aunt's house in Willow Creek, but only after Rob had promised Oliver she could visit again tomorrow. Rob had driven her himself, shocked by the contrast between his world and the run-down apartment complex where Emma lived. He'd watched her trudge up cracked concrete steps to a dingy second-floor unit, waiting until she was safely inside before driving away, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. How did I miss the signs? Rob muttered to himself, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. The bourbon, an expensive single barrel he rarely indulged in, burned down his throat, doing little to ease the knot of tension that had taken up residence there. He pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a silver-framed photograph, one of the few personal items in his otherwise Spartan office. Julie's smile beamed back at him, radiant, genuine, kind. His first wife, Oliver's mother, had been everything Sarah was not, unpretentious, deeply compassionate, and utterly devoted to their son. Rob and Julie had met during his final year at Cornell. She'd been studying education, planning to become an elementary school teacher, when they'd literally collided outside the university library on a snowy February morning. Her armload of books had gone flying, and Rob had spent 10 fumbling minutes helping her gather them while stammering apologies. Something about her laughter, warm and forgiving, had captured him instantly. They'd married 2 years later, just as Rob was launching his first modest real estate venture with a small commercial property he'd purchased, using a combination of a bank loan and money saved from summer jobs. Julie had believed in him completely. Even when the first year had been so lean, they'd subsisted largely on ramen noodles and frozen vegetables in their tiny apartment. You're going to change the world someday. Rob Mitchell, she'd tell him, rubbing the tension from his shoulders as he pored over spreadsheets late into the night. But not because you'll make millions. Because you'll never forget why the millions matter. Julie had been his moral compass, his reality check. When success finally came, a successful office building, development that attracted attention from larger investors, she'd been the one to insist they use part of their newfound wealth to establish a scholarship fund for underprivileged students interested in urban planning and sustainable development. Oliver's birth had been the pinnacle of their happiness, though the complications during delivery that had ultimately caused his blindness had been devastating. Rob remembered the crushing guilt he'd felt when the doctors had explained that the extended oxygen deprivation during the difficult birth had damaged Oliver's optic nerves permanently. This isn't anyone's fault. Julie had insisted from her hospital bed, cradling their newborn son. He's perfect, Rob. Different than we expected, but perfect. And we'll learn everything we need to know to give him the world. And they had. For 5 wonderful, challenging years, they'd built a life centered around Oliver's needs and potential. Julie had put her teaching career on hold to focus on early intervention specialists, mobility training, and the foundations of Braille. Rob had continued growing his business, but had structured his schedule to be home for dinner most nights, for weekend adventures, for the everyday moments that comprised their family life. Then came the diagnosis that had shattered everything, an aggressive form of cancer that took Julie from vibrant to gone in 8 cruel months. Rob closed his eyes against the memory of her final days, the helplessness he'd felt watching the love of his life slip away despite the best medical care money could buy. His wealth, it turned out, couldn't save the one thing that mattered most. In the aftermath, Rob had thrown himself into work, partly to escape the emptiness of the house and partly to create a legacy worthy of Julie's memory. Mitchell Properties expanded rapidly, with major developments across the Northeast and eventually nationwide. The financial success had been staggering, but the personal cost had been high. Oliver, already adjusting to a world without his mother, had found himself increasingly alone as Rob traveled more frequently for business deals. The best caregivers and tutors money could buy became substitutes for parental presence. Rob justified his absences as necessary sacrifices to secure Oliver's future, all while missing the present moments his son needed most. When he was home, he smothered Oliver with gifts and outings, mistaking material abundance for the steady, consistent connection the boy truly needed. It was during this period of emotional displacement that Sarah had entered their lives. Rob met her at a charity gala in Manhattan, an event for vision research that he'd sponsored in Julie's memory. Sarah Harrison had been working for the foundation, organizing the event. The stunning blonde with impeccable credentials, Ivy League education, connections to New York's elite social circles, and an apparently passionate commitment to philanthropic causes. She'd approached him with sympathy about his loss that seemed genuine, asking thoughtful questions about Oliver, and expressing admiration for how Rob was managing as a single father. Looking back now, Rob could see how perfectly she'd positioned herself, identifying his vulnerabilities and presenting herself as the solution to problems he hadn't fully acknowledged. Their courtship had been brief but intense. Sarah had seemed so interested in Oliver, asking about his education and bringing him carefully selected gifts. She'd visited their Greenwich home, commenting on its beautiful architecture, but suggesting small changes that would make it more accessible for Oliver. Her knowledge of resources for visually impaired children had impressed Rob, making him believe she truly understood their situation. Oliver needs stability, she'd told him during a dinner at her Manhattan apartment 3 months after they'd met. And you need someone who understands the demands of your position. I could help with both. The proposal had come from him just a month later, a decision that, in retrospect, had been driven more by convenience and loneliness than by the deep, soul-connecting love he'd shared with Julie. Sarah had accepted immediately, slipping perfectly into the role of Mrs. Robert Mitchell, socialite and stepmother. The wedding had been an elaborate affair at the Greenwich Country Club, featured in society pages and business journals alike. Oliver had been the ring-bearer, looking uncomfortably formal in his little tuxedo. Rob remembered now how his son had seemed withdrawn that day, how he'd clung to Nancy's hand rather than Sarah's during the reception. "He just needs time to adjust," Sarah had assured him during their honeymoon in the Maldives. "Blending families is always challenging, but we'll make it work." For a while it had seemed they were making it work. Sarah managed their social calendar and household staff with impressive efficiency. She accompanied Rob to business functions, charming, potential investors and partners with her wit and grace. On the surface, their life appeared picture-perfect. The successful businessman, his beautiful wife, their historic estate in Connecticut's most prestigious enclave. But there had been signs, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious, that something was fundamentally wrong beneath the polished exterior. Oliver, once curious and talkative despite his shyness, grew quieter when Sarah was around. He stopped sharing stories about his days, responding to questions with minimal answers. When Rob was home, he noticed how his son seemed to physically position himself away from Sarah, gravitating instead toward Nancy or his tutor, Mr. Abernathy. "He's just going through a phase," Sarah would explain whenever Rob expressed concern. "All children test boundaries. Oliver needs to understand that our household has rules, especially given his special needs." That phrase, special needs, had always bothered Rob, though he'd never quite articulated why. The way Sarah said it carried a subtle undercurrent of burden, of inconvenience, that stood in stark contrast to how Julie had approached their son's blindness, not as a disability that limited him, but as a different way of experiencing the world that they would navigate together. Rob had ignored his misgivings, brushing aside the moments of tension he witnessed between his wife and son as normal adjustment difficulties. His travel schedule had intensified, with major new developments in Chicago and Seattle, making it easier to avoid confronting the growing distance in his marriage and the subtle changes in his home. Now, sitting alone in his office after what he'd witnessed that morning, Rob could no longer deny the truth. The life he'd built, or thought he'd built, was a carefully constructed illusion. Sarah had never loved Oliver. She'd merely tolerated him as part of the package that came with the Mitchell name and fortune. The warmth and concern she'd displayed during their courtship had been a calculated performance, designed to secure her position in Rob's world. More disturbingly, Rob was forced to confront his own culpability. He had been so desperate to recreate a sense of normalcy after Julie's passing, so eager to believe he could provide Oliver with a complete family again, that he'd allowed himself to be deceived. Worse, he'd left his vulnerable son in the care of a woman who viewed him as an obstacle rather than a child deserving of love and protection. The realization was accompanied by a wave of shame so intense it made Rob physically nauseous. He set down his glass and buried his face in his hands, the weight of his failures as a father pressing down on him. A soft knock at the office door pulled him from his spiral of self-recrimination. Nancy stood in the doorway, her kind face creased with concern. "Mr. Mitchell? I'm sorry to disturb you, but Oliver is asking for you. He had a nightmare." Rob stood immediately. "Is he all right?" "Yes, sir. Just shaken up. He's asking about the girl, Emma. Wants to know if she's really coming back tomorrow." "Tell him I'll be right there," Rob replied, setting aside the photograph of Julie. As Nancy turned to go, he added, "Nancy, how long has Sarah been harsh with Oliver? The truth, please." The housekeeper hesitated, her hands fidgeting with her cardigan. "I didn't want to overstep, Mr. Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell is my employer too, and she made it clear that Oliver's discipline was her domain." "Nancy," Rob's voice was gentle but firm, "I need to know." "It started small," Nancy admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Comments about him being too slow, too messy, telling him he was being difficult when he needed help. Then came the restrictions. No going outside without permission, no disturbing her when she had guests, meals in his room instead of the dining room when you weren't home. She paused, visibly struggling. "I should have said something sooner, sir, but Mrs. Mitchell threatened to let me go if I caused trouble, and I was afraid of what would happen to Oliver if I wasn't here at all." The knot in Rob's stomach tightened. "Has she ever physically hurt him?" "Not that I've seen directly, sir, but there have been times when Oliver flinched if she moved too quickly near him. And once I found him hiding in his closet after she'd been yelling about a vase that got knocked over." Nancy's eyes filled with tears. "He's such a good boy, Mr. Mitchell. He never complains, never tells tales. He just withdraws more and more. Rob nodded, a cold resolve settling over him. Thank you for your honesty, Nancy. Things are going to change around here starting tonight. Please stay close to Oliver's room, and if Sarah attempts to go near him for any reason, come get me immediately. As Nancy left, Rob moved to the window overlooking the garden where that morning's confrontation had occurred. In the moonlight, the grand estate looked peaceful, almost enchanted, a false serenity that mirrored the facade of his marriage. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations, painful decisions, and the beginning of what would likely be a messy legal battle. But for the first time in years, Rob felt a clarity of purpose that had been missing since Julie's passing. He would make this right. For Oliver, for Emma, and for the values he had somehow lost sight of along the way. Whatever the cost, whatever the sacrifice, he would rebuild their lives on a foundation of truth rather than appearance. With newfound determination, Rob left his office to comfort his son, vowing silently that Oliver would never again feel alone or unprotected in his own home. Chapter 3. The Girl from Willow Creek. Emma Carter hurried along the cracked sidewalks of Willow Creek, her worn sneakers splashing through puddles left by the morning rain. The Connecticut autumn had painted the trees in brilliant hues of orange and red, but Emma barely noticed the beauty around her. Her mind was still at the Mitchell estate, with the blind boy who had become her friend and the unexpected kindness of his father. The Willow Creek apartments loomed ahead, a collection of weathered three-story buildings from the 1970s that had once been considered modern, but now stood as monuments to neglect. Emma slowed her pace as she approached Building C, mentally preparing herself for what awaited inside Apartment 2B. "Where have you been all day?" The question greeted Emma before she'd even fully closed the door behind her. Aunt Martha sat on the sagging couch, cigarette in one hand, remote control in the other, her eyes never leaving the reality show blaring on the television. "Just out walking," Emma replied carefully, slipping off her shoes and placing them neatly by the door. "I found a new path along the river." It wasn't exactly a lie. She had been walking the river path. It just happened to lead to the affluent neighborhoods that bordered their working-class community. Emma had discovered months ago that if she followed the winding trail far enough, she could reach streets lined with grand houses set on spacious, manicured lawns. Sometimes she would sit on a bench near the public section of the riverfront and imagine what life might be like in one of those houses, with parents who came home every night and refrigerators that were always full. Martha snorted, taking a long drag of her cigarette. "You need to stop with this wandering. People around here will think you're up to no good. Besides, I needed you to pick up a few things from the store." Emma glanced at the empty pizza box and scattered beer cans on the coffee table. Martha didn't appear to have moved much today. "I can go now if you still need things," Emma offered, though her feet ached from the day's walking. Martha waved dismissively. "Too late now. Already called for delivery." She finally looked at Emma properly, narrowing her eyes. "What's that on your sweater?" Emma glanced down, noticing the small smudge of chocolate on her sleeve, a reminder of the hot chocolate Nancy had made for her and Oliver at the Mitchell house. "Nothing. Just dirt," she said quickly. "I'll wash it out." The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a combined living room and kitchen area. Everything about it felt temporary, even though Emma had lived there for nearly a year. There were no family photos on the walls, no artwork, nothing that suggested permanence or belonging. Just Martha's collection of romance novels, stacked haphazardly on a bookshelf, and the mismatched furniture that had come with the rental. Emma slipped into the bathroom, closing the door quietly behind her. In the mirror's unforgiving fluorescent light, she studied her reflection. At 9 years old, Emma was small for her age, with a tangle of brown hair that fell past her shoulders and blue eyes that seemed too large for her thin face. Her mother had always called them Carter eyes, a family trait passed down through generations. Thinking of her mother sent a familiar ache through Emma's chest. It had been 10 months since the car accident that had taken both her parents, 10 months of living with Aunt Martha, who made no secret of the fact that becoming an instant guardian to her niece had derailed her plans to move to Florida with her now ex-boyfriend. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out the small object. She'd been carrying a polished blue stone that Oliver had given her that morning. "My dad brought it back from a trip to the ocean," he had explained as he pressed it into her palm. "He said it's the exact color of the sea on a clear day. I can't see it, but I can feel how smooth it is. I want you to have it." The gesture had nearly brought tears to Emma's eyes. Oliver had so few possessions that were truly his, meaningful objects chosen specifically for him, and he had given her one of his treasures after knowing her for just a few hours. A sharp knock on the bathroom door made Emma start. "Don't use up all the hot water," Martha called. "And hurry up. The delivery guy will be here any minute, and I need you to answer the door while I change." "Okay, Aunt Martha," Emma replied, tucking the stone back into her pocket. She quickly washed her hands and face, then exited the bathroom. The delivery arrived shortly after, Chinese food that Martha charged to a credit card that Emma suspected was already maxed out. They ate in silence at the small kitchen table, Martha scrolling through her phone while Emma pushed lo mein noodles around her plate. Her mind drifting back to the Mitchell estate. "So, did you make any friends at school this week?" Martha asked suddenly, the question so unexpected that Emma looked up in surprise. These moments of aunt-like concern were rare and unpredictable. "Not really," Emma admitted. The truth was, she kept to herself at Willow Creek Elementary. Being the new girl was hard enough. Being the new girl whose parents had died in a tragic accident made her an object of both curiosity and awkward pity. The other students didn't know how to act around her, and Emma didn't know how to bridge that gap. "You should try harder," Martha said with a sigh. "Join a club or something." "Kids need friends." She returned to her phone. Conversation apparently over. Emma thought about telling Martha about Oliver, about how they had connected so quickly, about how his father had driven her home and asked for their address and phone number. But something held her back. The experience felt too precious, too fragile to share with someone who might dismiss it or, worse, forbid her from returning. After dinner, Emma retreated to her bedroom, the smaller of the two. Barely large enough for a twin bed and a dresser, she removed her worn backpack from under the bed and carefully extracted her most valued possessions. A photo album her mother had made, documenting Emma's life from birth until last Christmas. A dog-eared copy of A Wrinkle in Time that her father had read to her multiple times, and a small velvet pouch containing her mother's simple wedding ring. Beneath these treasures was a notebook, a journal where Emma recorded her thoughts, feelings, and observations. It had been a gift from her fourth-grade teacher in Boston, Ms. Winters, who had recognized Emma's gift for writing and encouraged her to develop it. Emma settled on her bed, opened the notebook to a fresh page, and began to write about Oliver Mitchell. She described his gentle voice, the careful way he moved through spaces he had memorized, and the courage it must take to navigate a world he couldn't see. She wrote about the magnificent house with its winding driveway and enormous oak trees, so different from the cramped apartment where she now lived. She detailed the tension she had sensed between Oliver and his stepmother, and how that tension had exploded into the confrontation she had witnessed. Most of all, she wrote about the surprising connection she had felt with the blind boy, an immediate understanding that transcended their different circumstances. Oliver, despite living in luxury, seemed just as lonely as she was. The thought made Emma feel less alone somehow. Emma's early life in Boston had been modest but happy. Her father, James Carter, had worked as a high school English teacher, passing his love of literature to his daughter through nightly reading sessions. Her mother, Elizabeth, had been a nurse at a community clinic, working long hours but always finding time to bake cookies or help with homework on her days off. They had lived in a small but cozy apartment near Franklin Park, where weekends often involved picnics, kite flying, and impromptu soccer games. Money had been tight. Teachers and community nurses weren't highly paid, but Emma had never felt deprived. Her parents had been creative with resources, turning financial limitations into adventures rather than hardships. Birthday presents might be homemade or secondhand, but they were always thoughtfully chosen. Vacations meant camping trips to New Hampshire, rather than flights to Disney World. But those nights under the stars, roasting marshmallows while her father told stories, remained some of Emma's most cherished memories. Then came the icy January night, when her parents had driven to a friend's anniversary dinner in the suburbs. The call had come at 9:17 p.m. while Emma was staying with a neighbor. Black ice on a curved road. A truck that couldn't stop in time. Both James and Elizabeth pronounced dead at the scene. In an instant, Emma's secure world had shattered. There had been no other close relatives to take her in. Her grandparents were gone, and her father had been an only child. Martha, her mother's younger sister with whom they'd had infrequent contact, had been the only option available. The move from Boston to Greenwich had happened in a blur of social worker visits, hastily packed boxes, and a funeral where Emma had stood numb and disbelieving as strangers offered condolences. Martha had done her legal duty by taking in her orphaned niece, but emotional support had been minimal. She'd enrolled Emma in school, provided basic necessities, and otherwise continued her life much as before, working irregular hours at a local bar, dating a series of men who never stayed long, and treating Emma's presence as an inconvenience she was enduring until things got sorted out, though what that meant was never explained. Emma had learned quickly to be self-sufficient. She made her own simple breakfasts and packed her school lunches. She did her homework without reminders and kept her few clothes clean and neatly folded. She avoided asking Martha for anything that wasn't essential, becoming invisible within her own home as a way of minimizing conflict. The loneliness had been the hardest part. Emma missed the sound of her father's laughter, the smell of her mother's perfume, the feeling of being truly seen and cherished. At school she was cordial but reserved, unwilling to risk new attachments after losing the ones that had defined her life. Her teachers noticed her intelligence and writing ability, but were concerned by her emotional withdrawal, sending home notes that Martha read with impatience before tossing them aside. It was during this period of isolation that Emma had begun her solitary explorations of Greenwich. On weekends and after school, she would wander farther and farther from Willow Creek, discovering parks, libraries, and the river path that eventually led to neighborhoods like the one where the Mitchells lived. These walks became her escape, hours of freedom where she could observe other families, collect interesting stones or leaves, and imagine different possibilities for her future. That morning, she had followed the river path farther than usual, drawn by the vibrant fall colors. She had just decided to turn back when she spotted Oliver sitting alone on a stone bench near the edge of what she later realized was the Mitchell property. Something about his solitary figure, the careful way he tilted his head to listen to the birds, his fingers lightly tracing the bench's edge, had compelled her to approach. "Hello," she had said softly, not wanting to startle him. "Are you okay out here by yourself?" Oliver had turned toward her voice, his unseeing eyes wide with surprise. "I'm fine," he'd replied. "I know this spot well. It's my thinking place." "It's a good spot," Emma had agreed, keeping her distance but curious about this boy who seemed close to her own age, yet so different. "The trees are really pretty right now. All orange and red and yellow. Can you describe them to me?" Oliver had asked, and something in his voice, a genuine interest mixed with a hint of longing, had touched Emma deeply. She had sat beside him then, launching into a detailed description of the autumn scenery, the way the sunlight filtered through leaves of different colors, creating a stained glass effect, the particular shade of a nearby maple tree that reminded her of spilled cinnamon, the contrast between the vibrant foliage and the gray-blue of the flowing river. Oliver had listened with rapt attention, asking questions that demonstrated his keen interest in understanding visual details he couldn't experience directly. Emma found herself using increasingly precise language, drawing on vocabulary from her father's literature lessons to paint verbal pictures for her new acquaintance. They had moved from descriptions of the landscape to personal stories, Oliver explaining how he navigated his home using memorized step counts and textural landmarks, Emma sharing snippets about her former life in Boston. Neither mentioned the losses that shaped their current circumstances, yet both seemed to sense the underlying sadness in the other. Their conversation had flowed with surprising ease until Sarah Mitchell's angry voice had shattered the peaceful moment. Oliver's immediate fear and Sarah's undisguised contempt for Emma had triggered a protective instinct that surprised even Emma herself. Without thinking, she had positioned herself between Oliver and his angry stepmother, determined to shield this gentle boy from the fury directed at them both. Now, finishing her journal entry about the day's events, Emma wondered if she would truly be allowed to return to the Mitchell estate tomorrow. Mr. Mitchell had seemed sincere when he promised Oliver, but adults often made promises they didn't keep. Emma had learned that lesson too many times over the past year to fully trust his words. Still, something about Robert Mitchell's demeanor, the genuine concern in his eyes when he looked at his son, the quiet determination in his voice when he confronted his wife, gave Emma hope. He seemed different from the other adults who had drifted through her life since the accident, the distracted social workers, the overwhelmed teachers, the reluctant aunt who saw her as an obligation rather than a child. The sound of the television from the living room dropped suddenly as Martha apparently retired to her bedroom. Emma closed her journal and returned it to her backpack, along with her other treasures. She changed into her pajamas, a faded t-shirt that had once belonged to her father, and a pair of sweatpants that were beginning to get too short, and crawled under the thin blanket on her bed. As she drifted towards sleep, Emma's fingers closed around the smooth blue stone in her pocket. Whatever happened tomorrow, she had made a connection today that felt important, even transformative. For the first time in months, she had found someone who needed her presence as much as she needed his. In Oliver Mitchell's friendship, Emma had discovered a small but precious sense of purpose. And perhaps, just perhaps in the grand house on the hill, there might be room for a girl who had nowhere else to truly belong. Chapter 4. Confrontations and Decisions. The morning sun streamed through the bay windows of the Mitchell estate's formal dining room, illuminating the tense scene unfolding around the antique mahogany table. Rob sat at one end, a cup of coffee cooling untouched before him. Sarah occupied the opposite end, her posture rigid, her normally perfect makeup applied with slightly less precision than usual, betraying a restless night. "I've already contacted my attorney," Rob said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "He'll be drafting separation papers today." Sarah's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the polished wood. "Don't you think you're overreacting? One disagreement about how to handle Oliver, and you're ready to throw away our marriage." Her voice was controlled, reasonable, the same tone she used when negotiating charitable donations or managing difficult social situations. "This isn't about one disagreement," Rob replied evenly. "This is about a pattern that I've been too blind to see. Nancy told me everything last night, Sarah. The isolation, the emotional manipulation, the way you've treated my son when I wasn't around to witness it." A flicker of something anger. Fear crossed Sarah's face before her composed mask slid back into place. "Nancy has always resented me. She was too attached to Oliver's mother and never accepted me as part of this family. Whatever she told you is exaggerated at best, outright lies at worst. And Oliver? Is he lying too?" Rob leaned forward, his voice low but intense. "Because he spent an hour last night telling me things that no 8-year-old should have to experience. Do you know what he said to me? He said he was glad I came home early because you were extra angry yesterday." "Extra angry, Sarah, as if your regular level of anger toward a blind child is somehow acceptable." Sarah's facade cracked slightly, her lips thinning with annoyance. "Children exaggerate, Robert. You know that. Oliver has been testing boundaries ever since we married. He needs structure and consistency, which I've tried to provide while you're jet-setting around the country, building your empire." The accusation stung, partly because Rob recognized the grain of truth in it. His frequent absences had indeed left Oliver vulnerable, a fact that would haunt him for a long time to come. "I've made mistakes," Rob acknowledged, "and I'll spend the rest of my life making them right. But nothing justifies how you've treated my son. The verbal abuse, the isolation, the threats, it stops today. I want you out of this house by the end of the week." Sarah's composed demeanor finally shattered. "You can't be serious. After everything I've sacrificed for this family, I gave up my career, my independence to be your wife and Oliver's stepmother. I've managed this household, maintained your social connections, represented you at countless charity functions, and this is how you repay me, by believing the word of a servant and a child over your own wife. My son is not just a child, Sarah. He's the most important person in my life, and I failed him by not seeing what was happening right under my roof." Rob's voice remained steady, though his hands had curled into fists beneath the table. "As for what you've sacrificed, let's be honest. You married me for the lifestyle, The social position, the financial security. Oliver was always an inconvenience to you, an obstacle to the perfect life you envisioned. Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You have no idea what it's like trying to raise someone else's child, especially one with special needs. I did my best under impossible circumstances. Your best? Rob's voice finally rose. Your best was terrorizing an 8-year-old boy who can't see? Your best was making him eat alone in his room when I was traveling? Your best was threatening to fire the only person who's shown him consistent kindness if she spoke up about your behavior? He took a deep breath, struggling to regain his composure. And what about Emma? What kind of person threatens a child who has already lost everything? At the mention of Emma, Sarah's expression hardened further. That girl was trespassing on our property. She's clearly from the wrong side of the tracks, probably looking for things to steal. I was protecting our home and Oliver. She was protecting Oliver from you, Rob corrected, the memory of Emma's small body positioned defensively in front of his son still vivid in his mind. A complete stranger showed more compassion and courage than the woman I married. What does that tell you? Sarah gathered her designer handbag from the side table, her movements precise and controlled once more. It tells me that you've made your decision based on emotion rather than reason. Fine, have your dramatic separation, but don't expect this to be simple, Robert. I signed a prenuptial agreement, yes, but I've been a Mitchell for 2 years. I've entertained your business associates, supported your charitable endeavors, been the perfect corporate wife. My attorney will ensure I'm compensated appropriately for my contributions to your success. Your attorney is welcome to try, Rob replied calmly. But I should remind you that our prenup has a morality clause. Emotional abuse of a minor would certainly qualify as grounds for me to contest any settlement beyond the specified minimum. The color drained from Sarah's face. You wouldn't dare. Think of the scandal, the publicity. Mitchell Properties would suffer. Your reputation is nothing compared to my son's well-being, Rob finished firmly. I don't want a legal battle, Sarah. Take the settlement outlined in the prenup, sign the papers without contest, and we can both move forward with minimal drama. Fight me on this, and I'll be forced to make everything public. Every detail of how you've treated Oliver will come to light. Is that really what you want? The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, breaking the tense silence that followed Rob's ultimatum. Sarah's knuckles whitened around the handle of her handbag, but when she spoke, her voice was eerily calm. You'll regret this, Robert. No judge will grant you full divorce based on unsubstantiated claims from an imaginative child and a housekeeper, afraid of losing her job. She moved toward the doorway, then paused. And that girl from the slums? She's using you, using Oliver. People like that always have an angle. Rob remained seated as Sarah left the room, listening to her heels clicking across the marble foyer and up the grand staircase. Only when he heard the guest suite door close did he allow his shoulders to slump, the weight of the confrontation finally settling upon him. Nancy appeared in the doorway, her kind face creased with concern. Is everything all right, Mr. Mitchell? No, Nancy, it isn't, Rob admitted, running a hand through his hair. But it will be. Is Oliver awake? Yes, sir. He's having breakfast in the kitchen. He's been asking about Emma since he got up. Rob glanced at his watch. I told her I'd send a car for her around 10. Would you mind calling our driver and arranging that? And Nancy, he hesitated, then continued, thank you for everything you've done for Oliver, for being the consistent presence he needed when I wasn't here. Nancy blinked rapidly, clearly emotional. He's a special boy, Mr. Mitchell. It's been my privilege. She hesitated, then added, if I may say so, sir, Mrs. Mitchell is right about one thing. There will be talk. People in your circle don't understand much about situations like this. Let them talk, Rob replied, standing to his full height. I've spent too many years caring about appearances, about what our so-called friends think. It stops now. Across town in Willow Creek, Emma was attempting to slip out of the apartment without waking her aunt. She had been up since dawn, unable to sleep with the anticipation of returning to the Mitchell estate. She'd washed her face, brushed her teeth, and changed into her cleanest jeans and a faded blue sweater that had once been bright but was now softened by countless washings. She was nearly at the door when Martha's voice stopped her. Where do you think you're going so early on a Saturday? Emma turned slowly to find her aunt emerging from her bedroom, wrapped in a threadbare robe, her hair disheveled from sleep. "Just going for a walk," Emma replied, aiming for casual, but hearing the tension in her own voice. Martha frowned, studying her niece more carefully than usual. "You're dressed differently, and you've done something to your hair." Emma had in fact spent 20 minutes trying to tame her unruly curls into a neater arrangement, using the single elastic band she owned. "I'm meeting a friend," Emma admitted, deciding that a partial truth was better than an outright lie. "A friend? Since when do you have friends? Who is it?" Martha's suspicion was tinged with genuine curiosity, which somehow made the interrogation worse. Emma shifted uncomfortably. "His name is Oliver. He lives in the nice part of town. His dad said I could visit today." Martha's eyebrows shot up. "The nice part of town? How did you meet some rich kid?" "By the river path," Emma explained, growing increasingly anxious as the minutes ticked by. What if Mr. Mitchell sent someone to pick her up and she wasn't ready? What if they thought she'd changed her mind? "Please, Aunt Martha, I really need to go. They're expecting me." Martha crossed her arms, blocking Emma's path to the door. "Not so fast. Tell me more about this family. What does the father do? What's their last name?" Emma hesitated, then reluctantly answered, "Mitchell. Oliver Mitchell. His dad owns a big company that builds things." Martha's expression changed instantly, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Mitchell? As in Mitchell Properties? Robert Mitchell?" Emma nodded, surprised by her aunt's reaction. "You know them." "Everyone in Connecticut knows the Mitchells," Martha replied, her tone suddenly different, calculating, almost hungry. "They're worth millions. Billions, maybe." She studied Emma with new interest. "And Robert Mitchell invited you to their house. Why would he do that?" "Oliver and I became friends," Emma said simply, unwilling to explain the full circumstances of their meeting. "His dad was nice to me." Martha's mind was clearly racing, connecting dots that Emma hadn't even considered. "This could be interesting," she murmured, more to herself than to Emma. Then, with sudden decisiveness, she said, "Wait here." She disappeared into her bedroom, emerging 10 minutes later, transformed. Her hair was brushed, her face hastily but effectively made up, and she had changed into the outfit she usually reserved for job interviews, a modest dress with a cardigan that disguised its slightly dated style. "I'll go with you," she announced. Reaching for her purse, Emma's heart sank. "But—" "No arguments," Martha cut her off. "I'm your guardian, Emma. If you're going to be spending time at some millionaire's mansion, I need to meet the family myself. Make sure it's all appropriate." Before Emma could protest further, a knock at the apartment door startled them both. Martha moved to answer it, smoothing her hair one last time before pulling the door open with a practiced smile. A uniformed man stood in the hallway, clearly a professional driver, his posture formal but not unfriendly. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm from the Mitchell residence. I've been sent to collect Miss Emma Carter." Martha's smile widened. "How thoughtful. I'm Martha Donovan, Emma's aunt and legal guardian. I was just telling Emma that I should accompany her today to properly meet Mr. Mitchell and thank him for his kindness to my niece." The driver hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Of course, ma'am. The car is waiting downstairs whenever you're ready." 5 minutes later, Emma found herself in the back of a sleek black SUV, sitting as far from her aunt as the vehicle allowed, a sense of dread building in her stomach. The day she had been looking forward to was already veering off course. Martha's sudden interest in her friendship with Oliver could only complicate things, potentially even end them before they truly began. "Don't look so glum," Martha chided, noticing Emma's expression. "This is a good thing. Connections like this don't just happen every day, especially not for people like us." "What do you mean, connections?" Emma asked warily. Martha patted Emma's knee with uncharacteristic affection. "You'll understand when you're older. Just be your usual sweet self. Robert Mitchell is exactly the kind of person who could change our situation." The implication in Martha's words made Emma deeply uncomfortable, though she couldn't articulate exactly why. All she knew was that her simple friendship with Oliver was suddenly being viewed as something else entirely, something her aunt saw as potentially valuable or exploitable. The SUV pulled through the gates of the Mitchell estate precisely at 10 o'clock. Emma felt a flutter of nerves mixed with excitement as the magnificent house came into view. Martha let out a low whistle beside her, clearly impressed despite her attempt to appear nonchalant. "Well, well," she murmured. "No wonder you were so eager to come back." The car came to a stop at the front entrance, where Rob Mitchell was waiting on the steps. His expression was warm as he spotted Emma, but a flicker of surprise crossed his face when he saw she wasn't alone. Emma exited the vehicle first, summoning a smile despite her apprehension. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell. This is my aunt, Martha Donovan." Rob extended his hand politely as Martha emerged from the car, her own hand already outstretched. "Ms. Donovan, a pleasure to meet you. I wasn't expecting you today, but you're certainly welcome." "I couldn't possibly let Emma visit without properly introducing myself," Martha replied, her voice taking on a tone Emma rarely heard, refined, almost deferential. "It's so kind of you to include her in your son's life." Rob's eyes flickered briefly to Emma, who tried to communicate her discomfort through her expression alone. If he noticed, he gave no indication, maintaining his cordial demeanor as he guided them into the house. "Oliver is waiting in the garden," he explained. "He's been counting the minutes until Emma's arrival. Perhaps we adults could speak in the study while the children get reacquainted." Martha nodded enthusiastically. "That sounds perfect." As they entered the magnificent foyer, Emma caught sight of Oliver sitting on a bench in the garden, visible through the French doors. He was perfectly still, head tilted slightly as if listening intently for any sign of her arrival. "Can I go to Oliver now?" Emma asked, eager to escape the awkward adult interaction. Rob smiled genuinely. "Of course. The door to the right will take you straight to the garden. Nancy has prepared some snacks for you both." With a grateful nod, Emma slipped away, leaving the adults behind. As she hurried toward the garden, she heard Rob directing Martha toward his study, his voice pleasant but with an undertone of caution that gave Emma hope. Perhaps Mr. Mitchell was perceptive enough to see through her aunt's sudden interest. The moment Emma stepped onto the stone patio, Oliver's face lit up, turning unerringly toward the sound of her footsteps. "Emma, is that you?" he called, standing from his bench. "It's me," she confirmed, the tension of the morning melting away as she approached her friend. "I told you I'd come back." Oliver's smile was radiant. "I knew you would," Dad promised, and he never breaks his promises. He hesitated, then added, "Something feels different today. The house is quieter somehow." Emma glanced back at the imposing structure, wondering what conversations were taking place inside and how they might affect this fragile new friendship that already meant so much to them both. Chapter 5. New Beginnings. The weeks that followed marked a profound transformation in the Mitchell household. Sarah had departed the estate 3 days after the confrontation, taking with her only personal items and leaving behind the numerous gifts Rob had bestowed during their short marriage. The prenuptial agreement negotiations had been tense but ultimately swift. Sarah, recognizing the potential damage to her social standing if the full details of her behavior became public, had accepted the settlement terms with surprising efficiency. For Oliver, the absence of his stepmother created an immediate, palpable shift in the atmosphere of the house. He moved more freely through the rooms, laughed more readily, and began to speak without the hesitation that had characterized his interactions for so long. The change was both heartwarming and heartbreaking for Rob, who continued to struggle with the guilt of having missed the signs of his son's distress for so many months. Emma's presence became a constant bright spot in their evolving dynamic. What had begun as occasional visits, carefully negotiated with Martha, who remained transparently interested in cultivating a connection to the Mitchell fortune, gradually shifted to regular afternoons at the estate. Oliver flourished in Emma's company, his natural curiosity and intelligence finding an enthusiastic companion who never treated his blindness as a limitation. On a crisp November afternoon, 6 weeks after Sarah's departure, Rob stood at his office window watching the children in the garden below. They were engaged in what appeared to be an elaborate game of their own invention, with Emma describing an imaginary landscape that Oliver navigated using a stick as a symbolic sword. Their laughter floated up through the partially open window, a sound that had once been rare in the somber mansion, but now filled its spaces with surprising frequency. They're good for each other, Nancy observed, entering the office with a tray of coffee. I haven't seen Oliver this happy since Julie was alive, Rob finished softly. I know. Nancy set the tray down and poured him a cup, adding the precise amount of cream he preferred. Emma's quite remarkable for her age. She has an old soul, as my mother would say. Rob nodded, accepting the coffee with a grateful smile. Her resilience is extraordinary. After everything she's been through, she still has this capacity for joy, for connection. He sighed, turning back to the window. I've been thinking about her situation a lot lately, Nancy. I suspected as much, sir, Nancy replied, following his gaze to the children below. The contrast between her visits here and her life with that aunt is stark. It was an understatement. Rob had visited the Willow Creek apartment several times now, initially to speak with Martha about Emma's visits, but increasingly out of concern for the girl's well-being. Each time he'd been struck by the neglect evident in the sparsely furnished rooms, the nearly empty refrigerator, and Martha's barely concealed indifference to her niece's daily life. Martha Donovan is interested in exactly one thing, Rob said, his voice hardening slightly. Financial gain. She sees Emma as a potential avenue to access my wealth, nothing more. Nancy had been with the family long enough to speak frankly. The woman's about as subtle as a freight train, Mr. Mitchell. The way she hints about her financial difficulties whenever you're around, that's shameful. Rob had indeed endured numerous uncomfortable conversations with Martha, ranging from transparent mentions of overdue rent to more direct suggestions that her sacrifice in taking in Emma deserved some form of compensation. He had initially responded with measured generosity, covering some essential bills, arranging for grocery deliveries, even providing Emma with a new winter coat when he noticed her shivering in a threadbare jacket during an October visit. But these gestures, while addressing immediate needs, did nothing to change the fundamental problem. Emma Carter, a bright, compassionate child with enormous potential, was living in an environment of emotional neglect, with a guardian who viewed her as a burden at best, a potential meal ticket at worst. I spoke with my attorney yesterday, Rob said, setting down his coffee cup, about options for Emma's situation. Nancy's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't seem entirely surprised. What did he say? That it's complicated, Rob replied with a rueful smile. Gaining guardianship of a child who already has a legal guardian, even one as clearly unsuitable as Martha, isn't straightforward. Especially when I'm a single father with a demanding career and no biological relationship to Emma. But not impossible? Nancy pressed gently. Rob shook his head. Not impossible. Difficult, potentially lengthy, but not impossible. He hesitated, then added, I'm going to pursue it. Nancy, I can't in good conscience leave Emma in that situation when I have the means to provide her with the home and opportunities she deserves. Nancy nodded approvingly. Julie would be proud of you, sir. The mention of his late wife brought a familiar ache but also a sense of rightness. Julie, with her boundless compassion and unwavering moral clarity, would indeed have championed Emma's cause without hesitation. I've made so many mistakes since losing her, Rob admitted quietly. Put my energy into building the business, accumulating wealth, maintaining appearances, all at the expense of what really matters. I left Oliver vulnerable. I married a woman who cared more about social status than my son's well-being. I've been lost. But you're finding your way back, Nancy reminded him gently. That's what matters now. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of running footsteps in the hallway, followed by a rapid knocking on the office door. Dad, Oliver called. Can we come in? Emma has an awesome idea. Rob smiled, some of his solemnity lifting. Come in, buddy. The door burst open and the children entered with the boundless energy only the young possess. Oliver navigated the familiar space with confidence, while Emma hesitated briefly at the threshold, still somewhat awed by the grandeur of certain rooms in the mansion. Mr. Mitchell, she began, her natural politeness asserting itself despite her excitement. Oliver and I were thinking about Thanksgiving. It's coming up in 2 weeks, and Oliver said you don't have any plans yet. Rob glanced at his son, whose expression was a mixture of hopefulness and uncertainty. That's right. I thought we might have a quiet dinner here, just the family. The word family hung in the air. its definition suddenly fluid and evolving in the context of their changing lives. "Well," Emma continued, gathering courage, "I was wondering, hoping, actually, if maybe my Aunt Martha and I could join you for Thanksgiving dinner?" She rushed on before Rob could respond. "It's just that we don't really do much for holidays. And Oliver was telling me about all the traditions you used to have. And it sounded so nice, and I thought, that's a wonderful idea," Rob interjected, saving her from her spiral of explanation. "Of course you and your aunt are welcome for Thanksgiving." Oliver's face broke into a wide smile. "I told you he'd say yes, Emma. And maybe you could even stay overnight in one of the guest rooms, Dad, could she?" The eagerness in his son's voice tugged at Rob's heart. "If it's all right with Miss Donovan, Emma is always welcome to stay." Emma's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? I've never had a sleepover before." The simple admission, one of many that periodically revealed the gaps in Emma's childhood experiences, struck Rob forcefully. While his own son had certainly faced challenges, particularly after losing his mother and dealing with Sarah's coldness, he had never lacked for material comfort or basic opportunities. Emma, by contrast, had been deprived of even the simple joys most children took for granted. "Then it's settled," Rob declared, making a spontaneous decision. "In fact, why don't we make it a long weekend? Your aunt might appreciate some time to herself, and we could all use a proper celebration." The joy that bloomed across Emma's face in that moment cemented Rob's determination to change her circumstances permanently. No child should be so delighted by the simple prospect of belonging, of being wanted, even temporarily. Thanksgiving at the Mitchell estate became a turning point in all their lives, though none of them realized it at the time. Martha had agreed to the arrangement with suspicious eagerness, particularly when Rob mentioned that he'd be happy to host her for the holiday meal, but could also arrange for Emma to stay for the long weekend if Martha had other plans. As a matter of fact, Martha had replied during a phone call the week before Thanksgiving, "My friend Diane has been begging me to visit her in Atlantic City. It would be a real blessing if Emma could stay with you folks while I take a little break. Caretaker fatigue is real." You know, the barely concealed relief in her voice when offloading responsibility for her niece would have been comical if it weren't so fundamentally sad. The holiday itself unfolded with unexpected warmth and joy. Rob had instructed his regular staff to create a traditional feast, but he also made sure to involve the children in small preparations, allowing them to decorate the formal dining room with handmade place cards and centerpieces, letting them help Nancy bake pumpkin pies the day before. For Emma, these simple activities seemed magical. For Oliver, they represented a return to the family traditions that had been abandoned after his mother's passing. Martha appeared for the Thanksgiving meal, dressed in what was clearly her finest outfit, her manner oscillating between exaggerated politeness and barely disguised assessment of the mansion's valuable contents. She ate enthusiastically, complimented the food effusively, and made several awkward attempts to steer conversation toward Rob's business success. When the meal concluded and the children asked to be excused to play a game Oliver had adapted for his abilities, Martha made no move to join them, instead accepting Rob's offer of a brandy in the library with obvious satisfaction. "This really is so generous of you. Robert," she said, settling into a leather armchair and accepting the crystal snifter with practiced casualness. "Emma hasn't stopped talking about your family since she met Oliver. It's all Mitchell this and Mitchell that at home." Rob smiled politely, taking the seat across from her. "Emma is a remarkable child. She's been wonderful for Oliver, the first real friend he's connected with." Martha nodded, taking a sip of the expensive brandy. "She's a good girl despite everything. Not that it's been easy, you understand. Taking in a child wasn't exactly in my life plan, but what can you do when tragedy strikes? Blood is blood." "Indeed," Rob agreed, studying her carefully. "It must have been a significant adjustment for you." "You have no idea," Martha sighed, warming to her audience. "My apartment is tiny, completely unsuitable for a growing child. And the expenses. Children need so many things: clothes, school supplies, activities. The state assistance barely covers the basics." It was the opening Rob had been anticipating. "I've been thinking about that, actually." "About Emma's situation." Martha leaned forward slightly, her attention sharpening. "Oh, it's clear to me that Emma has thrived during her time here," Rob continued carefully. Her friendship with Oliver has been transformative for them both. I've been wondering if there might be a more permanent arrangement that could benefit everyone. Martha's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of arrangement? A guardianship arrangement, Rob said directly. I'd like to become Emma's legal guardian, with your consent. She would live here, receive the best education possible, have stability and opportunities she currently lacks. And of course, he added, seeing the calculation in Martha's expression, there would be financial consideration for you, in recognition of your stepping aside. Martha didn't even attempt to hide her interest now. Financial consideration. What exactly are we talking about? A one-time settlement, Rob replied, his tone businesslike. Sufficient to allow you to relocate if you wished, perhaps to Florida as I believe you once planned. Plus a modest annual stipend for a period of, say, 5 years, to ease the transition. He named a figure that made Martha's eyes widen appreciably, generous enough to be tempting, yet not so extravagant as to suggest desperation on his part. And all I would need to do is sign over guardianship? Martha clarified, the brandy forgotten in her hand. Legal guardianship, yes. My attorneys would handle all the paperwork, of course. So it would be a clean, straightforward transaction. Martha seemed to catch herself then, rearranging her features into an expression of maternal concern. I'd need to think about it. Emma has been through so much trauma already, losing her parents. I wouldn't want to add to her sense of abandonment. It took considerable restraint for Rob not to point out that Martha had demonstrated precious little concern for Emma's emotional well-being thus far. Instead, he nodded understandingly. Of course, it's a significant decision. But from what I've observed, Emma feels more at home here with Oliver than she does in an environment where she's constantly reminded of what she's lost. Here she could have a fresh start, a new family that wants and values her. Martha studied him for a long moment, then set down her glass decisively. I'll consider your offer, Robert. It's certainly generous, and I do want what's best for Emma. The conversation shifted to logistics after that, how the arrangement might work, what the legal process would entail, the timeline for a decision. By the time Martha departed that evening, leaving Emma for her mini-vacation with the Mitchells, Rob was cautiously optimistic that his proposal had taken root in Martha's mind. What he hadn't anticipated was how quickly that seed would grow. The 4-day Thanksgiving weekend unfolded like a dream for Emma. Free from Martha's indifferent oversight and Sarah's hostile presence, the Mitchell house became a haven of discovery and joy. Rob cleared his schedule entirely, focusing on creating memories with the children that would begin to heal the fractures of the past months. They visited the New York Botanical Gardens holiday train show, where Emma patiently described each miniature landmark to Oliver, guiding his hands to feel the textured surfaces of the botanical materials used to create the displays. They attended a specially designed sensory performance of holiday music, where Oliver could fully appreciate the artistry through sound, vibration, and touch. They decorated the mansion for Christmas, with Emma climbing ladders to hang ornaments on the 12-foot tree, while Oliver sorted decorations by texture and sound, creating his own system of holiday organization. Throughout it all, Rob observed the children's deepening bond, with a mixture of joy and contemplative planning. Emma's intuitive understanding of Oliver's needs, the way she naturally included him without overcompensating for his blindness, her talent for descriptive language that painted vivid pictures with words, seemed almost miraculous. Oliver, in turn, was blossoming in her company, his confidence growing daily as he found in Emma a companion who saw his capabilities rather than his limitations. On the final evening of the long weekend, after Oliver had gone to bed, Rob found Emma sitting alone in the library, a large art book open on her lap. She was studying the colorful reproductions of famous paintings with such intensity that she didn't notice his entrance until he spoke. "Finding something interesting?" he asked gently, not wanting to startle her. Emma looked up, smiling. "These are amazing. I've never seen books like this before. The colors are so bright, even on paper." Rob sat in the chair beside her, glancing at the open page, a Monet garden scene, vibrant with impressionistic flowers. "That's one of my favorites. Julie, Oliver's mom, loved impressionist paintings. We visited the Musée d'Orsay in Paris once, And she spent hours just looking at the Monets and Renoir. What was she like? Emma asked softly. Oliver talks about her sometimes, but it's hard for him to remember everything since he was little when she left. Rob noted Emma's careful avoidance of the word died, a linguistic choice that spoke volumes about her own grief. Julie was extraordinary, he replied, smiling at the memory. Brilliant, but never showy about it. Kind in a way that made everyone around her want to be better. She could make friends with anyone, from the custodial staff to CEOs, and treat them all with the same genuine interest and respect. She sounds like she was a wonderful mum, Emma said, closing the book carefully. The best, Rob agreed. Oliver was her world. When we learned he would be blind, she spent every waking moment researching, connecting with other parents of visually impaired children, adapting our home, finding the right specialists. She was determined that his life would be different, but not diminished. That's what good parents do, isn't it? Emma asked, her voice small. My mom and dad were like that too. Not rich like you, but they always made sure I had what I needed. They read to me every night and took me to the library on Saturdays. My dad said books could take you anywhere, even if you couldn't afford a plane ticket. The simple description broke Rob's heart. Your parents sound like they were wonderful people, Emma. They were, she agreed, tracing the embossed title on the book cover. After a pause, she asked hesitantly, do you think they would be sad about how things are now? With Aunt Martha, I mean. The question hung in the air, loaded with complexity beyond Emma's years. Rob chose his words carefully. I think parents want their children to be safe, loved, and given opportunities to grow into the people they're meant to become. I didn't know your parents, but based on how remarkable their daughter is, I'm certain that's what they would want for you. Emma nodded, considering this. Aunt Martha tries, I guess. But she didn't really want a kid. She had other plans. Adults sometimes struggle to adapt when life doesn't follow their expected path, Rob acknowledged. But that doesn't mean you deserve any less than any other child, Emma. You know that, right? She shrugged, her expression suddenly guarded in a way no 9-year-olds should be. It's okay. I'm used to it now. But you shouldn't have to be used to it, Rob said gently. Every child deserves to be in a home where they're truly wanted, truly valued. Emma looked up at him then, a flicker of something. Hope. Fear crossing her face. I like it here, she said simply. With you and Oliver and Nancy, I feel different here. Like I matter. You do matter, Emma, Rob said firmly. More than you know. Before he could say more, the library phone rang, an unusual occurrence so late in the evening. Rob answered it, surprised to hear Martha Donovan's voice on the line. Robert, glad I caught you. Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation, about Emma's situation. I've made my decision. Rob glanced at Emma, who was watching him curiously. I see. Perhaps we could discuss this tomorrow when... No need to wait, Martha interrupted. I'm ready to move forward with the arrangement we discussed. The sooner the better, actually. Diane has a lead on a condo in Fort Lauderdale that would be perfect, but I'd need to move quickly. If your offer still stands... Rob felt a surge of conflicting emotions, satisfaction that his plan was moving forward, disgust at the casual way Martha was prepared to relinquish her niece for financial gain, concern about how to explain this development to Emma herself. The offer stands, he confirmed, keeping his tone neutral for Emma's benefit. I'll have my attorney contact you first thing tomorrow to begin the paperwork. Perfect, Martha exclaimed, her relief palpable even through the phone line. And the initial payment could be expedited. For the condo deposit? That can be arranged, Rob replied, struggling to maintain his professional demeanor. We'll speak tomorrow. As he hung up the phone, he found Emma still watching him, her expression now tinged with anxiety. Was that Aunt Martha? Is she coming to get me now? The fear in her voice made the decision easy. Emma deserved truth, not protective half measures. Actually, Emma, that was about something very different. Something important that concerns you. Rob moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. Your aunt and I have been discussing the possibility of changing your living arrangement permanently. Emma's brow furrowed. What does that mean? It means, Rob said gently, that if you wanted to, and only if you wanted to, you could come live here with Oliver and me. Not just for visits or weekends, but all the time. This would become your home. The magnitude of the offer seemed to leave Emma temporarily speechless. She stared at Rob, her blue eyes wide with disbelief. But what about Aunt Martha? She finally managed. Your aunt and I have discussed it, and she agrees this might be the best solution for everyone. She's been thinking about moving to Florida, which would be difficult with a child in school. And you've formed such a strong connection with Oliver, with all of us really. You want me to live here? For real? Emma's voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the possibility being offered. For real, Rob confirmed. I would become your legal guardian, responsible for your care, your education, your well-being. You would have your own room permanently. You'd go to school with Oliver. This would be your home, Emma. Tears welled in Emma's eyes, spilling down her cheeks before she could wipe them away. But why? Why would you do that for me? The question, so direct, so fundamentally sad in its implication that she couldn't comprehend why anyone would choose her, cemented Rob's certainty that he was making the right decision. Because you deserve a home where you're valued and loved, he said simply. Because Oliver needs you as much as you need him. Because sometimes, Emma, families aren't just made by blood, they're made by choice, by connection, by belonging together. Emma launched herself into his arms then, her small body shaking with silent sobs. Rob held her gently, this child who had already lost so much, yet somehow maintained the capacity for trust, for hope. Does this mean I can stay? She whispered against his shoulder. If that's what you want, Rob assured her, then yes, Emma, you can stay. For good. As Emma's tears gradually subsided, replaced by a tentative, dawning joy, Rob found himself thinking of Julie. She would have loved this fierce, resilient girl who had unexpectedly entered their lives. She would have recognized, as he now did, that sometimes the most precious gifts arrive in the most unexpected packages. The Mitchell family was reforming, healing, expanding in ways Rob could never have anticipated when he'd returned early from his London trip that fateful morning. There would be challenges ahead, legal hurdles, adjustments, the inevitable complications of building a new family from fragmented pieces. But in that moment, with Emma's trust so vulnerably, completely given, Rob knew with absolute certainty that they would face those challenges together. Chapter 6. Challenges and Growth. January brought with it a bitter New England cold snap and a series of unexpected complications to Rob's guardianship petition for Emma. What had initially seemed like a straightforward process, particularly with Martha's enthusiastic cooperation, had evolved into a bureaucratic labyrinth that tested his patience and resolve. Don't understand the hold-up, Rob said, pacing the length of his attorney's office in downtown Greenwich. Outside, snow fell in thick flakes, accumulating on the window ledge. Martha has signed all the consent forms. We've submitted every piece of documentation requested. Emma has been living with us for over a month now without any issues. What's the problem? James Harrington, Rob's longtime corporate attorney and friend, sighed as he adjusted his reading glasses. The problem, Rob, is that family court judges are inherently cautious when it comes to transferring guardianship of a minor, especially to someone with no biological relationship to the child. Judge Winters has concerns about the financial arrangement with Martha Donovan. It's not a bribe, Rob said firmly. It's a reasonable settlement to help her relocate and rebuild her life without the responsibility of a child she never wanted in the first place. I understand that, James replied, and so do you. But from the court's perspective, it looks like you, a wealthy, influential businessman, are essentially purchasing guardianship of a vulnerable child from her financially struggling relative. That raises red flags regardless of your intentions. Rob dropped into the chair opposite James's desk, running a hand through his hair in frustration. So what do we do? I'm not letting Emma go back to that situation. Not now, not ever. The conviction in his voice must have struck James, who looked up from his legal pad with a thoughtful expression. You've changed, you know, since all this began. What do you mean? The Rob Mitchell I've known for 15 years would have approached this like any other business acquisition. Identify the obstacles, eliminate them efficiently, move on. You'd have been frustrated by the delay but detached from the emotional aspects. James set down his pen. The man sitting in front of me now is something else entirely. Rob considered this. Having your entire worldview upended tends to change a person, he admitted. discovering that my wife was emotionally abusing my son while I was busy empire building, realizing how close I came to losing Oliver's trust completely. Meeting Emma and seeing how a child with so little can give so much, he shook his head. Let's just say I've had to reconsider what actually matters, which is precisely what we need to convey to Judge Winters, James said, leaning forward. This isn't about buying a child or acquiring a companion for Oliver. It's about creating a family for two children who desperately need each other and you. We need to shift the narrative. How do we do that? First, James replied, we need to address the financial aspect head-on. I suggest we restructure the arrangement with Martha Donovan. Instead of a lump sum payment that could be interpreted as selling Emma, we establish a trust for Emma's future education and welfare that Martha cannot access directly. We can still provide Martha with a reasonable relocation stipend, but framed as assistance for a family member in need, not as compensation for Emma. Rob nodded slowly. That makes sense. Martha won't like the reduced immediate payout, but she's already received enough to secure that condo in Florida she wanted. What else? Second, we need to demonstrate your commitment to Emma's well-being beyond material provision. The home study was positive, but Judge Winters noted that your work schedule remains demanding. She's concerned about whether you can truly provide the emotional support and presence Emma needs, particularly given your history of frequent travel and long hours. This observation stung, partly because it echoed Rob's own deepest fear, that despite his best intentions, he might still fail Emma the way he had failed Oliver during those years after Julie's passing. I've already made significant changes, Rob pointed out. I've delegated day-to-day operations to my executive team. I've limited travel to absolutely essential trips, and even then, only for 2 or 3 days at most. I'm home for dinner every night I'm in town. All good steps, James acknowledged. But the court needs to see a more fundamental shift in your priorities, not just adjustments to your schedule. Rob fell silent considering this challenge. After a moment he asked, what about the Mitchell Foundation? The one Julie and I started for vision research after Oliver was born. James looked intrigued. What about it? I've been thinking about expanding its mission, Rob explained, the idea taking shape as he spoke, creating a new division focused specifically on supporting children who have lost parents or are in vulnerable home situations, using my business expertise and connections to create something meaningful. Programs, resources, advocacy, not just writing checks, but actually getting involved personally. That could certainly help demonstrate your commitment, James agreed, especially if you can show how your experiences with Emma have informed this new direction. It wouldn't just be for show, Rob clarified firmly. Meeting Emma, seeing how the system failed her despite everyone's supposedly best intentions, it's opened my eyes to how many other children must be falling through the cracks. I want to do something real about it. James studied him thoughtfully. I believe you. And I think Judge Winters would too, if she could see the man I'm seeing right now instead of the corporate titan she's read about in the business pages. He made a note on his legal pad. We'll revise our approach and request another hearing. In the meantime, continue documenting every aspect of Emma's integration into your family. School progress, medical appointments, activities, everyday moments. Build the case that her best interest is unquestionably served by remaining with you and Oliver. As Rob left the downtown office building and stepped into the swirling snow, his thoughts turned to the children waiting at home. Emma had started at Oliver's private school after the winter break, an adjustment that had brought both triumphs and challenges. The academic transition had been smoother than expected. Emma's intelligence, a natural curiosity, helping her quickly adapt to the more rigorous curriculum, but the social aspects had proven more difficult. The privileged children of Greenwich's elite weren't universally welcoming. To a new student from Willow Creek, with second-hand clothes and no family pedigree, there had been whispers, exclusions from birthday party invitations, subtle slights that Emma tried to hide, but that Oliver, with his heightened sensitivity to tone and emotion, invariably detected and reported to his father with indignation. Rob had been tempted to intervene directly, to call parents, to demand better from their children, but Emma had surprised him with her perspective on the situation. It doesn't really bother me, she had said one evening after a particularly difficult day, when a group of girls had made comments about her charity case status. They don't know me, not really. They just see what they expect to see. That doesn't make it right, Rob had replied, angry on her behalf. Emma had shrugged, displaying that disconcerting maturity that sometimes made Rob's heart ache. My dad used to say that how people treat you says more about them than about you. I think he was right. Despite her philosophical attitude, Rob had noticed that Emma gravitated primarily toward Oliver and a small handful of other students who, for various reasons, existed on the social periphery themselves. A boy with severe anxiety, a girl whose parents were going through a public divorce, twins who had recently immigrated from South Korea and were still learning English. Together, this unlikely group had formed their own tight-knit circle, supporting each other in ways that the more popular students never seemed to consider necessary. Watching this unfold, Rob had realized that Emma possessed a unique gift for finding and nurturing connections with those who needed it most, a quality that seemed intrinsic to her character rather than something she had been taught. It was this same quality that had drawn her to Oliver that first day in the garden, that had compelled her to protect him despite the risks to herself. The drive home took longer than usual due to the worsening weather, giving Rob time to reflect on the changes of the past months. The Mitchell estate, once a showcase of wealth rather than a true home, had transformed with Emma's presence. Formal spaces had become playrooms. Pristine furnishings now bore the marks of active children, and the silence that had permeated the mansion during Sarah's tenure had been replaced by music, laughter, and the occasional good-natured argument. Emma had brought with her an unpretentious approach to life that constantly challenged Rob's assumptions about what was necessary or important. She marveled at amenities he took for granted: the heated indoor pool, the home theater, the professional-grade kitchen, but seemed equally content with simple pleasures, building snow forts in the garden, creating elaborate stories with Oliver, using household items as props, curling up in the library with one of the many books she devoured at an astonishing rate. Her perspective had begun to influence Rob's own priorities in unexpected ways. The designer suits he had once considered essential now seemed excessive. The social obligations he had maintained out of habit rather than desire had been gradually pruned away, making room for family movie nights and weekend adventures. The corporate acquisitions that had once dominated his thoughts now competed with considerations of Emma's academic progress and Oliver's growing independence. As Rob finally pulled through the gates of the estate, he was greeted by the sight of Emma and Oliver, engaged in building what appeared to be an elaborate snow castle on the front lawn, supervised by Nancy, who stood nearby with steaming mugs of what was likely hot chocolate. The scene, so ordinary yet so precious, strengthened his resolve to overcome whatever obstacles the court might present. Inside, after the children had been persuaded to come in from the cold, shed their snow-covered outerwear, and warm up with Nancy's hot chocolate, Rob retreated to his office to make a series of calls that would set in motion the changes he and James had discussed. The financial restructuring was relatively straightforward. His accountants and foundation managers could implement the new trust arrangement for Emma with minimal difficulty. The expansion of the Mitchell Foundation's mission would require more substantial work, but the core team was experienced and capable. The most significant call was to Mitchell Properties Executive Board, where Rob formally proposed a restructuring of his own role within the company he had built. After years of hands-on leadership and micromanagement, he was ready to step back into a more strategic position: chairman rather than CEO, visionary rather than daily operator. The transition would take time to implement fully, but Rob was surprised by the board's receptiveness to the idea, particularly when he explained his reasons. "My priorities have changed," he told them simply. "The company is strong, our leadership team is exceptional, and I believe this restructuring will ultimately benefit everyone involved." Mitchell Properties was never meant to be dependent on a single individual, and it's time I proved that by empowering others to lead while I focus on the legacy aspects of our work and on being a father to two children who need me present in their lives. By the time he emerged from his office, evening had fallen, and the house had settled into its comfortable rhythm. He found Emma and Oliver in the library, engaged in what had become a nightly ritual. Emma reading aloud from a novel while Oliver listened, occasionally asking questions or making predictions about the plot. Tonight's selection was The Secret Garden, a choice. That struck Rob as particularly appropriate, given the parallels to their own situation. Children finding healing and connection in unexpected circumstances. He paused in the doorway, content to observe unnoticed for a moment. Emma read with remarkable expression for her age, adjusting her voice for different characters and pausing at dramatic moments for effect. Oliver sat enraptured, his face animated in a way it never was with audiobooks or digital assistants. "Is this the book your dad used to read to you?" Oliver asked during a natural break in the story. Emma nodded, then verbalized her response, always mindful of Oliver's need for auditory confirmation. "Yes, he said it was one of his favorites when he was a kid too. He had this really deep voice that was perfect for Dickens' parts." "Do you think my dad would read some of it to us?" Oliver suggested. "He's really good at voices too." Emma looked up then, spotting Rob in the doorway. Her smile, still sometimes tentative as if she remained unsure of her place, brightened the room more effectively than the expensive designer lighting ever could. "Mr. Mitchell, would you read some of our book? Oliver thinks you'd be good at the voices." "I'd be honored," Rob replied, crossing to join them on the comfortable sofa, "though I should warn you my Yorkshire accent is questionable at best." Emma handed him the book with a solemnity that suggested she was entrusting him with something precious, which, Rob realized, she was. This wasn't just any book, but a connection to the father she had lost, a bridge between her past and present. As Rob began to read, with Emma cuddled against one side and Oliver against the other, he felt a profound sense of rightness that transcended the legal complications, the social adjustments, and the practical challenges they still faced. Whatever label the court eventually assigned to their relationship, Emma was already his daughter in every way that mattered, and he would move mountains to ensure that reality was recognized and protected. The next morning brought unexpected news that shifted the guardianship proceedings in a new direction. Martha Donovan, apparently dissatisfied with the proposed restructuring of the financial arrangement, had contacted Judge Winters directly, expressing concern about Emma's well-being and suggesting that Rob's interest in her niece might have inappropriate motivations. "It's a transparent attempt at leverage," James explained during an emergency call. "She's hoping to pressure you into restoring the original payment terms. The good news is that Judge Winters saw through it immediately. Martha's timing was suspiciously aligned with our proposed financial changes. The bad news is that this has raised the profile of the case and introduced an element of scandal that we could have done without." Rob struggled to control his anger. "She's willing to throw Emma under the bus for a few extra dollars?" "After everything that child has been through?" "Unfortunately, yes, but her actions have actually created an opportunity. Judge Winters has scheduled an immediate hearing, tomorrow morning, and has requested Emma's presence for a private conversation in chambers. She wants to hear directly from Emma about her wishes and experiences." "Is that standard procedure?" Rob asked, concerned about subjecting Emma to more stress. "Not entirely, but it's within the judge's discretion, particularly when allegations of impropriety have been raised. I think it's actually a positive development. Judge Winters is known for taking children's perspectives seriously, and Emma is remarkably articulate about her situation." Rob hesitated. "Should we prepare her? Coach her on what to say?" "Absolutely not," James replied firmly. "First, it would be ethically questionable. Second, Judge Winters would see through it instantly. She's been handling family court cases for 20 years. And third, Emma doesn't need coaching. The truth of her situation and her genuine feelings about living with you and Oliver are the most compelling argument we have." That evening, Rob sat with Emma in her bedroom, once a sterile guest suite, now personalized with books, art supplies, and a few treasured possessions she had brought from her former life. He explained the situation as simply and honestly as he could, emphasizing that she had done nothing wrong and that whatever happened, she would not be abandoned again. "So the judge wants to talk to me?" Emma asked, processing the information with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "Just me without you or Aunt Martha there?" "That's right," Rob confirmed. "She wants to hear directly from you about how you feel living here, what you want for your future, anything that's important to you about this situation." "You just need to tell the truth, Emma. That's all anyone is asking of you." Emma nodded slowly. Will she send me back to Aunt Martha if I say the wrong thing? The question broke Rob's heart. Despite all the security and affection he had tried to provide, Emma still carried the fear of rejection, of being discarded if she didn't perform correctly. There is no wrong thing to say, he assured her, taking her small hands in his. This isn't a test. The judge just wants to understand what would be best for you, from your perspective. And whatever happens, Emma, I promise you this, I will never stop fighting for you, never. Emma studied his face, searching for reassurance. I'm scared, she admitted in a small voice. What if they don't listen to me? Grown-ups sometimes decide things without really listening. Judge Winters is different, Rob told her, hoping it was true. Her job is specifically to listen to children and make decisions that protect them. All you have to do is speak from your heart. After a moment, Emma nodded, a new resolve entering her expression. I can do that. I'm good at speaking from my heart. Yes, Rob agreed, pulling her into a gentle hug. You certainly are. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The previous day's snow transformed into sparkling crystal under the winter sunlight. Rob helped Emma select an outfit for court, nothing fancy or contrived, but clean and appropriate, and assured Oliver repeatedly that they would return home together, all three of them, no matter what happened at the hearing. The family court building was less imposing than Rob had expected, a modern structure with warm lighting and walls decorated with children's artwork, clearly designed to be less intimidating for its youngest visitors. Judge Eleanor Winters, when they were shown into her courtroom, matched the building's approach, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, sensible shoes, and a direct manner that balanced authority with accessibility. Martha was already present, seated with her own attorney, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit that made Rob wonder about Martha's financial management of the funds he had already provided. Martha herself was dressed more formally than he had ever seen her, in an outfit that screamed responsible guardian rather than Florida-bound partygoer. The proceedings began with brief statements from the attorneys, establishing the basic facts of the case. Judge Winters listened attentively, occasionally making notes, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. When the initial presentations concluded, she addressed Emma directly. Hello, Emma, I'm Judge Winters. I'd like to talk with you privately in my chambers, if that's all right with you. Emma glanced at Rob, who gave her an encouraging nod, then stood and straightened her shoulders. Yes, Your Honor, I'm ready. As Emma followed the judge through a side door, Rob felt a surge of fierce pride mixed with anxiety. In the short months she had been part of their family, Emma had demonstrated extraordinary resilience, adaptability, and emotional intelligence. He could only hope that Judge Winters would recognize these qualities and understand what he had come to know with absolute certainty, that Emma belonged with them, not as a charitable project or a companion for Oliver, but as an integral, irreplaceable member of their family. The next 45 minutes were among the longest of Rob's life. He sat rigidly in his chair, avoiding Martha's occasional glances, focusing instead on maintaining a calm demeanor for Oliver's benefit. The boy, sensitive to emotional undercurrents, held his hand tightly, occasionally whispering questions about what was happening. Finally, the chamber door reopened and Emma emerged, followed by Judge Winters. To Rob's relief, Emma appeared composed, even somewhat lighter, as if unburdened by having shared her thoughts. She returned to her seat beside him, giving his hand a small, reassuring squeeze that nearly undid his careful control. Judge Winters returned to her bench, arranged some papers, and then looked up at the assembled parties with an expression that had softened notably. Having reviewed all the documentation, heard from the attorneys, and most importantly, spoken at length with Emma herself, I am prepared to rule on this guardianship petition. She paused, her gaze moving between Rob and Martha. Family court cases are rarely simple, and this one presents several unusual aspects. However, the guiding principle in all my decisions is the best interest of the child involved. Rob held his breath, feeling Emma tense beside him. Emma has expressed herself with remarkable clarity regarding her current living situation, her relationship with Mr. Mitchell and his son, and her wishes for the future. She has also spoken honestly about her time with Ms. Donovan and the circumstances that led to this petition. Judge Winters directed her attention specifically to Martha. Ms. Donovan, While I appreciate the challenges you faced in suddenly becoming responsible for your niece after her parents' tragic passing, I am concerned by several aspects of your guardianship. Emma describes an environment of what I would characterize as benign neglect. Physical needs minimally met, but emotional and developmental needs largely ignored. Martha shifted uncomfortably, her attorney placing a restraining hand on her arm as she appeared ready to object. More troubling, Judge Winters continued, are your recent communications with this court, which appear motivated more by financial considerations than by genuine concern for Emma's welfare. The timing of your allegations against Mr. Mitchell, coinciding precisely with proposed changes to the financial arrangement, suggests an attempt at leveraging Emma's situation for monetary gain. The judge then turned to Rob. Mr. Mitchell, your petition presents its own complexities. The financial aspect, while restructured in a more appropriate manner, still raises questions about the transactional nature of this guardianship transfer. However, I am persuaded by the demonstrable changes you have made in your professional and personal life, the positive home environment you have created, and most significantly, by Emma's own testimony about the sense of security, belonging, and genuine affection she has experienced in your home. Judge Winters straightened her papers decisively. Therefore, I am granting temporary guardianship of Emma Carter to Robert Mitchell for a period of 6 months, during which time the court will conduct periodic evaluations of Emma's adjustment and well-being. Assuming those evaluations remain positive, I anticipate converting this to permanent guardianship at the end of that period, with a potential path to legal adoption should all parties wish to pursue that option in the future. Emma's hand tightened around Rob's, and he squeezed back gently, his throat too tight with emotion to speak immediately. As for the financial arrangements, the judge continued, I am approving the trust established for Emma's education and future needs, with Mr. Mitchell as trustee until Emma reaches majority. The relocation stipend for Ms. Donovan is approved at the reduced rate proposed in the revised petition. This court retains jurisdiction over any modifications to these arrangements. She fixed Martha with a stern look. And Ms. Donovan, I strongly advise against further communications with this court that appear designed to extract additional funds through implications of impropriety. Such tactics do not serve your niece's interests and will not be viewed favorably should this matter return before me. With a final rap of her gavel, Judge Winters concluded the hearing, and Rob found himself surrounded by his family. Oliver clinging to his side, Emma looking up at him with shining eyes, James offering quiet congratulations. Martha had already departed, her attorney trailing behind with a defeated expression. Does this mean I get to stay, for real? Emma asked, the lingering uncertainty in her voice reminding Rob that 6 months still felt like forever in a child's perception of time. Yes, Emma, he assured her, kneeling to meet her at eye level. You get to stay, for real. For good. All of us together? Oliver chimed in, his hand finding Emma's with practiced ease. All of us together, Rob confirmed, drawing both children into an embrace that felt like a promise, a new beginning and a homecoming all at once. Chapter 7. Full Circle. 2 years had transformed the Mitchell estate almost beyond recognition. What had once been a showplace of wealth and status, impressive but impersonal, had evolved into a true home filled with the evidence of active, happy children and a father who had discovered that success could be measured in ways that never appeared on a balance sheet. On a perfect June morning, the spacious backyard was decorated for a celebration. Colorful balloons tied to chairbacks danced in the gentle breeze. Tables covered in cheerful cloths held platters of food prepared by Nancy, whose role had expanded beyond housekeeper to something approaching family member. A banner strung between 2 oak trees proclaimed, "Congratulations, Emma," in bold letters. In the kitchen, Emma, now 11 and several, inches taller than when she had first entered the Mitchell home, was arranging freshly baked cookies on a platter, while simultaneously explaining something to Oliver with animated gestures. At nearly 11, Oliver too had grown, his childish softness giving way to the leaner build of impending adolescence, though his gentle nature remained unchanged. "Dad, are you sure Judge Winters is actually coming?" Oliver asked as Rob entered the kitchen. Though still blind, Oliver had developed an uncanny ability to identify people by their footsteps, a skill he credited to Emma's patient coaching. "Absolutely sure," Rob confirmed, snagging a cookie and earning a mock-indignant cry from Emma. Her office confirmed yesterday. She wouldn't miss this for anything. Emma's adoption hearing had been finalized the previous week, the culmination of 2 years of temporary guardianship, home studies, evaluations, and finally, the formal adoption process. What had begun as an unexpected connection in the garden had officially become a permanent family bond, recognized by law as it had long been recognized in their hearts. Judge Winters, who had overseen the entire journey, had been among the first people Emma had wanted to invite to the celebration. "She believed me when I told her. Where I belonged," Emma had explained, "she listened when other adults might not have." The guest list for the day's party reflected the changes in the Mitchells' social circle over the past 2 years. Gone were many of the superficial connections that had populated Rob and Sarah's dinner parties. The business associates maintained purely for networking, the socialites whose friendship had been based on status rather than genuine connection. In their place were the people who had supported their unconventional family journey, James Harrington and his wife, Oliver's music teacher, Mr. Abernathy, who had discovered the boy's remarkable talent for piano, Emma's art instructor from the community center where she volunteered, several families from the children's school whose acceptance had helped ease Emma's transition. Notable by her absence was Martha Donovan, who had relocated to Florida shortly after the initial guardianship hearing and maintained only the most minimal contact, annual birthday cards for Emma that arrived consistently late, containing generic messages and gift cards to stores that Emma never frequented. Emma had invited her aunt to the adoption celebration out of a sense of obligation, but Martha had declined with a vague excuse about prior commitments. Her loss had been Oliver's simple assessment when Emma shared the news, and after a moment of reflection, Emma had agreed. The complicated emotions she felt toward the aunt who had taken her in but never truly wanted her had evolved over time into something approaching compassion mixed with healthy detachment, a perspective Rob found remarkably mature for a child her age. As guests began to arrive, Rob watched his children move through the social interactions with confidence born of security. Oliver, once shy and withdrawn during Sarah's tenure in the household, now greeted visitors warmly, his natural charisma flourishing in an environment where he felt safe and valued. Emma, who had once carefully monitored adult reactions and modulated her behavior accordingly, a survival skill developed during her time with Martha, now expressed herself freely, her bright intelligence and quirky sense of humor evident in every conversation. "They're remarkable children," James Harrington commented, joining Rob near the refreshment table. "High testament to resilience, certainly, but also to what the right environment can nurture." Rob nodded, watching as Emma guided one of Oliver's younger school friends in placing his hand on a therapy dog that a neighbor had brought, teaching the technique she had developed to help Oliver connect with animals safely. "I used to think I had achieved something meaningful by building Mitchell Properties," he replied. "Now I realize I was just getting started on understanding what really constitutes an achievement." The company remained successful, more successful than ever. In fact, under the leadership team Rob had empowered when stepping back from day-to-day operations, he maintained strategic involvement and served as chairman of the board, but his 70-hour work weeks had given way to a more balanced approach that prioritized his presence in his children's lives. The Mitchell Foundation had undergone a similar transformation, expanding beyond its original focus on vision research to include substantial programming for children in vulnerable family situations. The foundation now operated a resource center in Willow Creek, Emma's former neighborhood, providing after-school programming, counseling services, and practical support for families in crisis. Rob was personally involved in the center's operations, drawing on his business acumen to create sustainable, effective interventions rather than just writing checks. Robert Mitchell, community advocate, James mused with a smile. "Not a role I would have predicted for you a few years ago." "Life has a way of revealing paths we never considered," Rob acknowledged. "Though I still rely on your legal expertise far too often," James laughed. Between the adoption, the foundation expansion, and the new community centre. I'm not complaining about the billable hours. Speaking of which, have you given any more thought to that proposal from the state task force? Rob had recently been approached about serving on a gubernatorial committee focused on reforming Connecticut's foster care and adoption systems, an appointment that would leverage both his business expertise and his personal experience navigating the complexities of the family court system. I'm leaning toward accepting, Rob admitted. The system needs significant overhaul, and if my perspective can contribute to making the process more humane and effective for other families. He trailed off as a new arrival caught his attention. Judge Eleanor. Winters was making her way across the lawn, distinguished in a summer dress that managed to be both professional and festive. Emma spotted her immediately and raced over, Oliver following at a more measured pace, guided by the sound of his sister's excited greeting. "Judge Winters! You really came!" Emma exclaimed, offering a spontaneous hug that the judge returned warmly. "I wouldn't have missed it, Emma. This is a special day for a special family." Judge Winters turned to Rob with a smile. "Mr. Mitchell, congratulations seem inadequate, but they are heartfelt nonetheless." "Thank you for coming, Your Honor," Rob replied, shaking her hand. "And more importantly, thank you for your wisdom and discernment throughout this journey. We quite literally wouldn't be here without you." The judge waved away his gratitude. "I simply recognized what was already evident, that you three belong together." She glanced around the transformed estate with approval. "This is quite different from the home I read about in the initial reports. Much improved, I would say." "Dad says we've turned it from a house into a home," Oliver offered, his unseeing eyes bright with happiness. "Emma says we've made it lived in." "Messy, he means," Emma clarified with a grin. "Nancy's always finding art supplies in weird places." "A home should be lived in," Judge Winters affirmed. "That's how you know it's serving its purpose." As the celebration continued into the afternoon, Rob found himself drawn to the oak tree where everything had begun, the spot where he had first seen Emma, protecting Oliver from Sarah's anger. A simple wooden bench now stood beneath the spreading branches, commemorating that pivotal moment in all their lives. Emma joined him there as the party began to wind down, sitting beside him in comfortable silence for a few moments before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about my parents today," she said softly. "My first parents, I mean," Rob nodded encouragingly. Over the past 2 years, they had worked carefully to honor James and Elizabeth Carter's memory, creating a special place in Emma's room with photographs and mementos, marking significant anniversaries and speaking of them often and lovingly. Rob had been adamant that adoption meant adding to Emma's family, not replacing or erasing her past. "I think they would like how things turned out," Emma continued. "They would like you and Oliver, and this place." She gestured toward the yard where Oliver was now demonstrating for Judge Winters how he had learned to navigate using subtle environmental cues rather than relying solely on touch. "My mom always said that family isn't just about who you're born to, but about who loves you enough to put you first. And my dad said that the measure of a man is how he treats people who can't do anything for him in return." The simple wisdom in these inherited maxims struck Rob deeply. "They sound like remarkable people. I wish I could have known them." "Me too," Emma agreed. "But I think maybe they helped guide me here somehow. To you and Oliver. Like they knew I would need a new family, and they made sure I found the right one." Rob put his arm around her shoulders, momentarily too moved to speak. In the 2 years since Emma had entered their lives, he had watched her transform from a guarded, prematurely serious child into a more carefree, confident person who still retained the empathy and perception that made her unique. The adoption paperwork had merely formalized what they had all known since those early days, that Emma was a Mitchell in every way that mattered, while also forever remaining a Carter, carrying her first family's legacy of love and values into her new life. Oliver joined them at the bench, having detected their absence from the main gathering. "What are you two doing hiding over here?" he asked, feeling for the edge of the seat before settling beside Emma. "Everyone's asking where you went." "Just taking a moment," Rob explained, remembering how it all started. Oliver's expression grew thoughtful. "You know what I remember about that day? Not the scary parts with Sarah. I remember how Emma described the garden to me, all the colors and shapes I couldn't see. No one had ever done that before, not like she did. Most people either talk to me like I'm a baby who doesn't understand what blue means, or they just don't mention visual things at all because they think it might make me sad. Emma bumped her shoulder against his affectionately. I just told you what I saw. Nothing special about that. It was special to me, Oliver insisted. It still is. Rob watched the easy interaction between his children, the gentle teasing, the comfortable physical proximity, the shorthand communication that had developed between them, and marveled at how naturally they had become siblings in every meaningful sense. Though different in temperament and background, they had forged a connection that supported them both. Emma's practicality balancing Oliver's dreamier nature, his musical sensibility, complementing her artistic talent, their shared experiences of loss, creating a foundation of mutual understanding that adults could rarely access. As they returned to the remaining guests, Rob found himself approached by Judge Winters, who had been observing the family moment from a respectful distance. "You've created something rather extraordinary here, Mr. Mitchell," she noted, "something that goes beyond the typical parameters of adoption and blended families." Rob shook his head slightly. "I can't take credit for what those two have built between themselves. That connection existed from the first moment they met. All I did was recognize its value and try not to impede it." "Don't underestimate your role," the judge advised. "Children thrive when adults create the conditions for their growth, then step back enough to let that growth occur naturally. It's a delicate balance that many parents, biological or adoptive, never quite achieve." She glanced toward Emma, who was now helping Oliver serve cake to an elderly neighbor. "That girl was headed for a difficult path when she first appeared in my courtroom. Statistics for children who lose parents traumatically, then experience inadequate subsequent care, are not encouraging. Yet here she is, secure, thriving, connected. She saved us as much as we saved her," Rob replied honestly. "I was losing Oliver, not physically but emotionally. The distance between us was growing every day I focused on work instead of him. Every day I left him with a stepmother who saw him as an inconvenience. Emma's appearance forced me to see what was happening right under my nose." Judge Winters nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the people who change our lives most profoundly arrive in unexpected packages at unexpected moments." She smiled suddenly. "I understand you're considering the governor's task force appointment." Rob raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast, like in certain circles. I hope you'll accept. The system needs voices like yours, people who have navigated its complexities from the inside and emerged with insights that could benefit others." Before Rob could respond, they were interrupted by Nancy, who approached with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry to intrude, Mr. Mitchell, but there's a situation that needs your attention. In the kitchen." In the massive chef's kitchen, Rob found Oliver and Emma standing before what appeared to be the remains of the elaborate adoption cake, now partially collapsed on one side, with blue frosting smeared across the counter and floor. "It was an accident," Oliver began immediately. "We were trying to move it to cut the last pieces, and I misjudged where the edge of the counter was, and I tried to catch it but only made it worse," Emma finished, looking distressed. "I'm really sorry. We wanted to serve Judge Winters the special piece with the fondant family figures, but now it's ruined and—" Rob held up a hand, stopping their anxious explanations. "Is anyone hurt?" Both children shook their heads. "Is it fixable?" Another shake. "Then it doesn't matter," Oliver frowned. "But the cake is just a cake," Rob completed firmly. "A symbol of today, not the substance of it. The substance is us, this family we've built together. No amount of smashed frosting changes that reality." Emma studied him carefully, a smile slowly spreading across her face. "You really mean that?" "Of course I do." "You wouldn't have said that 2 years ago," she pointed out, with the directness that still occasionally caught Rob off guard. "You would have been upset about the mess and the presentation and what people would think." Rob laughed, acknowledging the truth in her observation. 2 years ago, I was a very different person who cared about very different things. Thankfully, 2 remarkable children came into my life and helped me figure out what actually matters. Together, they salvaged what they could of the cake, transferring undamaged portions to fresh plates and disposing of the collapsed sections. What could have been a moment of tension or disappointment became instead another opportunity for the easy collaboration that characterized their family life, Emma directing operations, Oliver contributing his suggestions for creative solutions, Rob following their lead with amused appreciation for their problem-solving skills. By early evening, the last guests had departed, and a comfortable quiet settled over the estate. The hired cleanup crew had removed the party infrastructure, leaving the grounds as pristine as they had been that morning. Inside, the three Mitchells gathered in the library, their favorite room for family evenings, where books lined the walls and comfortable furniture invited relaxation. "I have something for each of you," Rob announced, retrieving a small wrapped package from his desk drawer. "A little tradition I'd like to start today." Emma accepted the package curiously. "But it's my adoption day. You've already given me so much, the party, the new art supplies, everything." "This is different," Rob explained. "Open it." Inside the package, nestled in tissue paper, was a small silver frame containing a photograph of the three of them, taken several months earlier during a weekend trip to Cape Cod. They stood on a wind-swept beach, arms around each other, laughing at something now forgotten. On the back of the frame, Rob had inscribed a simple phrase: "Family by choice, by chance, by love. June 15th, 2023. "I have a matching one for Oliver," Rob explained, handing his son an identical package, "and one for myself. I thought we could make it a tradition, adding a new photo each year on this date, building a visual history of our family as it grows and changes." Emma traced the inscription with her finger, while Oliver ran his hands carefully over the frame's contours, finding the engraving on the back and reading the Braille version Rob had thoughtfully included. "It's perfect," Emma declared, her voice thick with emotion. "The best adoption gift ever." Oliver nodded in agreement, carefully setting his frame on the table beside him. "Can we put them in our rooms tonight? So they're the first things we see, or in my case, touch in the morning." "Of course," Rob agreed. "That's exactly where they belong." Later, after the children had gone to bed, Rob stood in the hallway between their rooms, listening to the quiet sounds of his family settling for the night. From Oliver's room came the soft notes of the audiobook he listened to each evening, a ritual that had begun with Emma reading aloud, but had evolved as both children's independence grew. From Emma's room came the faint scratching of pencil on paper, her journal, he suspected, where she recorded her thoughts and preserved memories of both her past and present families. Rob moved to the window at the end of the hallway, looking out over the moonlit garden where their journey had begun. The bench beneath the oak tree was visible in the silvery light, a reminder of that pivotal moment when a courageous girl had protected a vulnerable boy, setting in motion changes none of them could have anticipated. In the stillness of the house that had become a true home, Rob Mitchell, once defined by his business success, now measuring his achievements in entirely different ways, offered a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for unexpected connections, and for the transformative power of seeing what truly matters through the eyes of a child. The Mitchell family's story had not ended with Adoption Day. In many ways it was just beginning. Three individuals brought together by circumstance, choice and love, creating a future built on the foundation of mutual respect, understanding, and the courage to begin again. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced the past 2 years, together, drawing strength from the bonds that had formed in the most unexpected of ways, on a morning that now seemed both recent and distant, when a businessman had come home early and discovered what had been missing from his life all along.